So, Charles I and the outbreak of civil war in the middle of the 17th century. There he is, King Charles, the only English king to lose his head. Funny word, lose, isn't it? Okay, he lost his head. So, as I say, Charles was very similar in many ways to his father, but the same kinds of problems were actually worse with Charles than they'd been with James. He spent a lot of money. If you remember, James brought the country into, he spent a huge amount of money, basically, I think, because Scotland was such a harsh country, and when he came to England, he found the living was much softer and he really enjoyed the luxurious life. So did Charles, and he believed in his own divine right. This is a really important word for the Stuarts, divine right. When we're talking about the Tudors, we had words like, from the Reformation, like justification by faith and things. They're important for the 16th century. Divine right is a very important expression for the 17th century. And he quarrelled with Parliament, mostly about money and taxation. He couldn't raise taxes without the agreement of Parliament, and Parliament frequently did not want to cooperate with him. And like his father, he took his position as head of the church very seriously. And the biggest difference was that although James avoided getting into wars, Charles got involved, mostly unsuccessfully, in a number of wars in Europe. Are we okay? Am I going a bit quick? Yeah? All right. There was war with Spain again. Now, we were talking before about James I's daughter who married the Elector Palatine in Bohemia. I put a couple of weeks ago, but I think this was actually last week we were talking about this. I switched the pinker around, so it was last week that we talked about this. And his daughter, the same one that the Catholics wanted to bring as Queen of England, because she was herself a Catholic, they wanted to bring her, if they could kill James, to be the king, to be the new queen. She had married the King of Bohemia in what is now Germany. The Elector Palatine of what is now Germany and the King of Bohemia. As I said last week, Germany wasn't a united country. It was a lot of smaller areas that were loosely connected under the Holy Roman Empire, which I talked about a little last week. I can't really go into a lot of detail about European history, so if you want to know more about it, you can check it out. I'll give you help if you want to know more. So, again, as we learned last week, when Frederick was deposed as the King of Bohemia, the Holy Roman Empire was torn apart in a power struggle, the 30 Years' War, and James kept out of it. This is what we talked about last week. Towards the end of his life, James was ready to go to war because Spain took possession of the Palatine, and he was against having a strongly Catholic presence in the middle of Europe. He died, but his son carried on and got England involved in this very nasty war, the 30 Years' War. And of course, these wars cost money. And apart from the money, there was also the incredible stupidity of the people in command. It seems like it was so bad. Charles himself messed things up pretty badly, and the Cadiz Expedition of 1625, which was supposed to be an attack on Spain, was a complete disaster, and the English were beaten completely. Charles wanted to forget all about it, but Parliament was furious that its money had been wasted and the English sailors had died, and they impeached the Duke of Buckingham, who was the leader of the expedition. They took him to court. Explain your actions. Why did we lose so badly? So Charles himself was not gifted in the art of warfare, and the leader of the expedition into Spain, the Duke of Buckingham, was also pretty awful, pretty bad. The Duke of Buckingham. George Villiers. And because of this problem, because the Parliament wanted to punish Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham, they wanted to punish him for losing so badly. They felt he'd made, terrible mistakes. When Charles had problems like this, he did the same as his father. He said, "Everybody go home, I'm closing down Parliament, I don't need you." So they're going, "We're not happy. We're very angry with this man who allowed so many English soldiers and sailors to die, and we want to punish him." But Charles says, "No, everybody, Parliament is closed, you just have to go home." So a lot of dissatisfaction going on here. It didn't help Villiers very much, because a couple of years later, one of the soldiers from the army killed him in revenge for his terrible leadership. Okay, so he was killed by an army officer who felt, if Parliament isn't going to punish him, then I will punish him. Well, at the time, the murderer, the army officer who killed Villiers, was considered by most people to be a hero. All right, he killed that stupid man who was responsible for all those English soldiers and sailors dying at the Cadiz Expedition. So that really shows that the people did not feel close to the king. All right. And then, of course, there was the plan for Charles to marry the Infanta of Spain. And again, I talked about this when talking about the father, when talking about James, how it all ended very unhappily. Remember, he went to Spain to romantically declare his love for her, and she didn't like him at all. So that also, of course, was a public relations disaster. And then after that, he married a French princess, Henrietta Maria. And she was a Catholic. And again, remember, the English people by now are very anti-Catholic in general. There's strong prejudice against Catholics. And the gunpowder plot, Mary's burning of Protestants, and these things were very strong in people's minds. And so it was not popular that he had married this French Catholic woman. And of course, he found all sorts of ways to raise money to finance his wars. It's like, I am the King of England. Will you lend me some money? I'll pay you back. Really, honestly, I will. Lend me some money. And he was borrowing money from people, taking money, and he never paid it back. Okay? Anybody who was crazy enough to give him money would lose it. So he was finding all kinds of tricky ways to get money to pay for his wars. And basically making himself very unpopular. And so Charles and Parliament. As I say, he closes down Parliament whenever he doesn't get Parliament to agree with him. And Parliament has quite a long history now, and it does not accept what Charles is doing. He closed Parliament 4 times in the first 4 years as king. And on the 4th time, he closed the Parliament for more than 10 years. It was closed until 1640. From 1629 to 1640, Parliament was closed. This is called the time of personal rule, where the king rules the country with no help from Parliament. But then again, finally he needed money. This time it's actually Scotland, which is interesting because, of course, he is Scottish. The Stuarts are a Scottish family, he's Scottish. But Scotland is against Charles now, mostly over a question of religion. They are against Charles's policies, and he needs money to control Scotland. The fighting in Scotland is called the Bishops' Wars, because I think I talked last week about the Episcopalian structure with a church hierarchy. Okay, Episcopalian as against Presbyterian. And again, these are important words for this period. I'll give it a capital E. Presbyterian church structure was not this hierarchy, all right, with the bishops at the top, okay, and the ordinary priests lower down, and the archbishop, okay, the archbishops up here, and the king or queen at the very top. This hierarchical structure was the way that the Church of England was developing. Scotland was developing more along a Presbyterian structure, so Scotland had a different idea of the structure of the church. So in 1640, James had to ask permission from Parliament to raise taxes. He couldn't do it on his own. He needed the support of Parliament. Basically, the structure that we had here was the king goes through Parliament. Parliament goes, it takes it down to the next level of civil service. And they then implement the policy. So if the king tries to tell the civil servants directly, they'll just say, no. You don't have the support of Parliament. We don't have to obey you. Okay? So we've got this kind of structure that the king has to go through in order to get the taxes from the people to raise money for the war that he wants to fight. So again, it's a hierarchical structure, but the king does not have complete power. He has to get the agreement, the cooperation of Parliament. And he calls Parliament together, and it only lasts for a few weeks, 3 weeks, and it's called the Short Parliament. During this short Parliament, basically, Charles wanted Scotland to follow the Church of England. Wanted the Scottish Church to have the same organisation, the same structure of its organisation, using bishops and having this hierarchy, and using the Book of Common Prayer, the prayer book that was used in the Ecoquilca in the Church of England. And Scotland wanted a different kind of church structure, so they started fighting against Charles. And basically, Charles wanted money in order to fight against Scotland. But Parliament did not want to talk about that problem. They said, before we talk to you about this, we've got other things that we want to talk about. We're not happy. We want to talk about your religious policies. We want to talk about your ways of taxation. We're not happy with what you're doing. So before we talk about Scotland and getting money for your war with Scotland, we want to talk about these other topics. And Charles said, go home, everybody. And he closed Parliament down after 3 weeks. Okay, so this is called the Short Parliament, but nothing got solved, so Charles had to ask Parliament again because he really needed their cooperation. So he calls Parliament again, and we get the Long Parliament. This goes on for many years, so it's called the Long Parliament. So because the problems were not solved in the Short Parliament, Charles had to call Parliament again. And so, again, Parliament insists on doing things that Charles doesn't want. They now want to impeach Charles's main kind of cooperator, William Laud. They want to charge him, they want to say that he is against the country. Oh, ちょっと待って。スペルのミスが同じ発音ですけど、名前は本当ローズです。どうしてロードを書きました？信じられない。Yeah, his name is Lord, not Lord, and he was the Archbishop of Canterbury, and he was very deeply unpopular with many English people, especially with the Puritans. Remember, the the very strongly Protestant people were against Laud. They hated him. And so by attacking Laud, who was chosen, okay, he's the archbishop. Among the archbishops, the Ichiban Erai archbishop is the Archbishop of Canterbury. He's the head of the bishops. So we've got the king or queen at the top with the archbishops, but inside the archbishops there's a hierarchy, and the Archbishop of Canterbury is at the top, and this is Laud. Okay, and he's been very strict against the Puritans, and they want to say, what the Parliament wants to say is, William Laud is using the church to make a power structure independent of Parliament. So he's using the church as a power structure. So Parliament is becoming unnecessary. They want to say he is creating his own power base using the church. So he was running an ecclesiastical state. I'm not sure if the Japanese works there properly. I hope you understand it. But the country is supposed to be run by Parliament. And what they're saying is, the king closes down Parliament, and it's the church that's running the country. And this is against the laws of the country. This is breaking down the system. So they wanted to say that this was treason. So here we've got all the. Can you see it? It's very clear. Anyway, you can't see their faces or anything. It's a bit of a bad image, but this is the House of Lords at this time, or the Houses of Parliament. The Houses of Parliament were divided into two parts. We've got the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Again, it's part of this system that has grown up in England of a democratic structure based on checks and balances, so that you have the power of the king, okay, to balance the power of the king, you have the lords, then to balance the lords and the king, you have the commons, okay, and so on. You have a system of checks and balances. And this has been, for Namgyaku Nenkan, this has been the way that the country has developed its structure. Now, we've reached the lords of, mostly the lords get their title, they get their kingly from the king. Either Mukashi, the king, said, you and your children and your grandchildren forever have the right to be lords. Okay, it's a family right. You inherit this right. Or he says, you have the right, but when you die, it finishes. So the king could choose different ways to bring people into the House of Lords. Some had continuing right through their children, others just had the right for their own lives. But basically, the lords were getting their power from the king. The commons were getting their power from the people through votes. But in the 17th century, most people couldn't vote. It was only a small number of people in each town had the right to vote. Okay? So just some people, not every, it was just some people who, again, Mukashi kara Tokyo no Kenri wo torimashita. They'd been given the right. But it was the people who would vote for the commons, and it was the lords who were given their power effectively by the king. And so that we've got a situation now where the House of Lords is supporting the king and the House of Commons is against him. And the Parliament also wants to punish Lord Stafford, the Deputy of Ireland. Now, what we've got is a war with Scotland. And here is James in London. He's trying to get money to attack Scotland, to fight against Scotland. And he's got the cooperation in Ireland of the leader of the army there, who has raised an army in Ireland. But the Parliament in London suspects utagaimasu. The Irish army, 本当にスコットランドをアタックすること、信頼できなかった。スコットランドへ行くより、ロンドンまで来るかな。Okay? ご心配してました。Okay? They were worried that the Irish army was only, it was a kind of pretending that it was for attacking Scotland, that really it was going to attack London, it was going to attack England, all right, and push out the Parliament. So they had the leader of the church, William Laud, and they had the leader of Ireland, Lord Stafford. Parliament wanted to punish both of these people. And Charles was by now frightened. He thought, oh, so, okay, Stafford will, I'll give you Stafford. You can have Stafford. And Stafford is taken and put to death. Okay, so okay, I'll give you Stafford. But by doing this, he shows that he is weak, and he can see that Parliament is strong. And now things slowly go into civil war. The Long Parliament started to make reforms about rights, for example. The king cannot say that the Parliament is closed, go home. Only Parliament can choose when to go home, all right, and when to close itself down. It's not the king's right to close down Parliament. And then, in addition to the problems in Scotland, there are problems in Ireland. Ireland is also starting to fight against England. And so, again, now James has two enemies that he needs to try to control, or two parts of Britain, Scotland and Ireland. They're both against the English at this point, and they're ready to fight. Well, they are fighting against the English. He needs to fight back, so the question of money gets even stronger. And in this situation, instead of giving him the money he wants, Parliament says, look, we have 150 complaints against you. We don't like this, we don't like this, we don't like this, we don't like 150 different things we don't like about you. It was a very long list. And Charles just said, I don't care. And he went into Parliament with soldiers, ready to attack Parliament. So 決してならなかった。ずっと最初から soldiers had never gone into Parliament. Charles entered Parliament with soldiers. But the politicians knew this was going to happen. And they had already, the ones who were at risk had already gone away, they weren't in the building. So Parliament is now openly against the king. And the king leaves London and goes to Oxford. So Parliament has its base in London. The king now has his base in Oxford. And the king is now saying, if you like me, come and join my army. And people are going to, getting together to fight against Parliament. And this is the Civil War. Okay, this is how it begins.